So today I'm going to tell you the story of the honest woodcutter. So it's an Aesop fable, and then I have a small addition that I heard recently. So once upon a time, long ago, there lived a woodcutter at the edge of a large and ancient wood. His name was Rolf, and he lived in a small family, a wife and four kids. And while they were not rich, they always had enough. For Rolf had one treasured possession to his name, his axe. It had a weathered wooden handle and a sharp iron blade, and it had been his father's axe and his father's father's axe before him. And every day he used to go into the forest with his axe and cut down wood and sell it at the market. Now, one day, Rolf went into the forest to find a new clearing of wood. But he took a wrong turn, and then he took another wrong turn. And then the thicket grew darker and the woods grew gloomier, and he reached a clearing in the wood. And all travelers that went in this wood know one thing about it, and that is not to wander too deep, for it is full of dark and ancient magic. And as he was running through trying to find his way out, whether it was the magic of the wood or it was simple bad luck, he tripped over a large gnarled root and went flying face first into the ground. He heard a splash, and when he looked up, he was at the edge of the riverbank of a large and deep river that went down into a chasm in the earth, dark and deep, where he could not see the bottom. And he also noticed that his axe was gone. As he had fallen, he had lost grip of it, and it had sunk deep into the river. He wailed with despair, for his axe was his livelihood. That is the way he put food on the table for his family. And it had been his father's axe before him, and there was no money to buy a new one. He looked around, but there was nothing he could do. The river was far too wide and far too deep, and the currents were far too unstable for him to dive in and retrieve it. But what else could he do? As he was contemplating diving in, he saw a shadowy figure emerge from the riverbank on the other side. An old woman in a dark winter cloak came out and asked him, "What is wrong, woodcutter? Why do you wail so?" Rolf said, "My axe has fallen into the river, and it is my only livelihood, and my family's lives depend on it. And it is gone, and there is no way to retrieve it." And the old woman said, "Don't worry, I can dive in and retrieve it for you." And in an instant, she stepped onto the surface of the river and sunk like a stone. Minutes passed, and Rolf was certain that she had drowned. But as suddenly as she had fallen in, she came out once again, and she was holding a large silver axe. It was a beautiful, intricately carved instrument, ruby encrusted with a sharp, polished blade. She asked Rolf, "Is this your axe?" Rolf looked at it. It was beautiful. He could have sold it at the market for a small fortune. And with that money, he could buy 100 new axes, a horse carriage, a wardrobe full of gowns for his wife. He might even be able to send one of his kids to college. But he thought about his father's axe sitting at the bottom of the river, with its weathered wooden handle and its sharp iron blade, and he realized for no amount of money could he do it. So he told the woman, "No, it is not my axe." And she stepped back into the river once again and sunk without a splash. And she was gone for even longer this time. She had certainly drowned. But out she sprung once again with a large golden axe. And it was even larger than the first, so much so that it was as tall as her entire height. It was so heavy and made out of solid gold that Rolf couldn't fell a tree with it. But because it was solid gold, a king or a sultan would pay any price to buy it. It was encrusted with diamonds and sapphires the size of grapes. And if he sold it, he wouldn't need to buy an axe anymore. He could retire. He would not need to work again. He could buy a small castle, 100 carriages, an army of servants. But alas, he could not do it. His father's axe was at the bottom of that river, and he remembered what his father always used to say to him: a man without integrity is a man with nothing. Well, he already had nothing, so he thought he might as well have some integrity. And he told the woman, no, that is not my axe. And she fell back into the river once again. He looked down at the 2 axes that she had left on the floor of the riverbank. It would mean a new life for him and his family. He could just grab them and leave. But he did not do it. And in an instant, much sooner than it had taken for her to retrieve the silver and golden axe, she came out with a familiar wooden handle and a sharp iron blade. She presented Rolf his father's axe, and he took it and he said, yes, this is my axe. And as a reward for his integrity, he was given all 3 axes, and he lived happily ever after. And he did send at least one of his kids to college. So I have a short addition to this story. So this story it's pretty common. I'm sure you've heard it. And it's traveled all around the world in its many forms. And actually, it was my dad that told me this new version that I think you might enjoy. So it's been a few years, and Rolf the woodcutter is enjoying his new riches. He sold these axes for an excellent price. His kids are in college. He's an empty nester now, living with his wife, and he's decided to do what all good rich people should do. And he's decided to buy a boat. It's beautiful. It's a solid wooden craft, and he's gotten a real bargain for it. It has the latest in oar technology of the time. And he decides he's bought this boat, and he's going to take his wife on a river cruise for their anniversary as a small surprise. So he does it. He takes his wife to the riverbank and he shows her this excellent boat. Well, she's not too happy that he's decided to spend so much of their money on a boat, but it's fine. She's gotten all dressed up. She has her hair ready, and they're going to have a good time in the river cruise. Now, he has to explain to her that he got a great deal, but it does mean she'll have to do a bit of rowing. It's just a minor arm workout. She won't notice. And they go on the river and they keep moving, and they're rowing the boat. And she doesn't look too happy, but it's fine. They have beautiful scenery around them. But then they start going into the forest, and whether Rolf had just forgotten or whether he was just too caught up in gauging his wife's facial expressions, but they went deeper and deeper into the forest. And as any traveler knows, that going in deeper and deeper into that forest is a bad idea. For there is dark and ancient magic in that forest. And whether it was the ancient magic or whether it was simply bad luck, something started happening with the oars, and the boat started veering to the side, and there was a fork in the river and a thicket, and the boat went through the thicket in the stream, and suddenly they were moving faster and faster, and there were rapids and there were rocks, and the boat was shaking and splashing around, and his wife's hairdo was ruined because everyone's drenched. And then there's an incline, and the boat goes down, and they're going faster and faster and faster, and suddenly they're in a new part of the forest, and it's dark. And this is not so scenic anymore. And the boat's going faster, and Rolf has his eyes closed because of the water splashing everywhere. And thwack, the boat hits a rock. There's a huge crack in the middle, and Rolf is just looking at the crack, and there's a splash. And he looks up, and his wife is gone. Honey! And suddenly, on one end of the riverbank, a shadowy figure emerges. An old lady in a thick black traveling cloak says to him, "Hello, sailor. Oh, it's you again. Well, it appears that your wife has fallen into the river. I shall dive in and retrieve her for you." and the old woman dives in, and she sinks without a splash. And minutes pass, and Rolf is certain that she has drowned, along with his poor wife. But out she springs with a beautiful woman on her arms. She has long brown hair and beautiful eyes, and looks a little bit like Angelina Jolie. And the old woman says to Rolf, "Is this your wife?" And Rolf remembers what his father told to him. And he thinks about his sad, bedraggled wife sitting at the bottom of the river, and how he dragged her on this river cruise for no reason, and how sad she was looking. And he looks into the old woman's eyes and he says, "Yep, that's her. I'll take it." "You cheat," the old woman says. "Have you lost your mind? You know how this works." And Rolf thinks for a little bit and he says, "I do know how this works. First, you'll present me this really beautiful woman, and then I'll say, no, that's not my wife. And then you'll present me an even more beautiful woman, and then I'll say, no, that's not my wife. And then finally you'll bring my wife out of the water, and I'll tell you, yes, that is my wife. And then you'll give me all three of them. And I'm only one man. I can't live with three wives. I'm having trouble with just one. So honestly, I think you should just leave us be." For Rolf's father always said, a man without integrity is a man with nothing, but a man without common sense is a fool. And the old woman couldn't really argue with that. So Rolf and the really beautiful woman lived happily ever after. And Rolf's wife, no one knows for sure what happened to her, but rumor has it that deep in the forest, an angry, bedraggled woman in a winter cloak waits for her husband to make the mistake of wandering into that forest once again.